This story is based on true events, and to this day, it still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. It all started when three friends, Lisa, Ben, and Mark, decided to visit Moosham Castle in Austria. The castle was infamous for its dark past, a place tied to witch trials and known for countless paranormal occurrences. The locals referred to it as the Witch's Castle and warned people to stay away. But these three friends, filled with curiosity and a sense of adventure, brushed off the warnings. They thought a day of exploring the old castle, followed by a night of camping inside, would be nothing but fun. Moosham Castle was nestled deep in the Austrian countryside, surrounded by forests that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. The sun was shining brightly on the day they arrived, and the scenery was beautiful. The sort of place you wouldn't think could harbor anything evil. The trio was excited as they parked their car, loaded with camping gear and snacks, ready for what they believed would be a harmless night of exploration and bonding. As they made their way toward the castle, its towering stone walls loomed above them. Centuries of history were etched into those walls, but there was something more. A certain coldness in the air that didn't quite match the warm, sunny day. The friends shrugged it off, figuring it was just their nerves playing tricks on them. After all, it was just an old building, right? Stepping through the large wooden entrance gate felt like crossing into another time. The interior of Moosham Castle was dark and damp, the walls covered in dust and cobwebs, as if the place had been forgotten by time itself. They walked through the massive halls, their footsteps echoing off the stone floors. They passed through narrow passageways, peering into rooms that seemed untouched for centuries. The decaying furniture and faded tapestries told stories of people long gone, but there was also something else, an uneasy feeling that they weren't alone. As the sun began to set, the group decided to set up their camp in the castle's grand hall. It was the largest room they had seen, with high ceilings and a massive chandelier hanging above, though many of its candles were missing or broken. They laid out their sleeping bags, started a small fire in the fireplace, and settled in for the night. At first, everything seemed fine. They ate, laughed, and swapped stories as the fire crackled and cast flickering shadows on the stone walls. The mood was light, and for a brief moment they forgot where they were. But as the night deepened, the atmosphere shifted. The once comforting sounds of the crackling fire were drowned out by a strange silence that seemed to envelop the castle. It wasn't just quiet. It was an unnatural stillness, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The friends noticed it almost simultaneously, but no one said anything at first. They just exchanged nervous glances, each one hoping the others hadn't noticed. Then it started. A faint whispering echoed through the grand hall. It was distant at first, almost like the sound of the wind passing through the cracks in the ancient stone walls. But as the minutes passed, the whispering grew louder, clearer. It was unmistakably human, but the words were unintelligible, like an old forgotten language being spoken just beyond the range of comprehension. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, bouncing off the walls in strange, disorienting patterns. Lisa was the first to react, her heart pounding in her chest. She scanned the room, her eyes wide, trying to locate the source of the whispers. But there was nothing there, just the flickering shadows cast by the dying fire. Ben and Mark also became visibly uneasy, their earlier bravado fading as the eerie sounds intensified. And then, out of the corner of her eye, Lisa saw it. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow moving across the far side of the room, slow and deliberate. But as she watched, the shadow took form, growing clearer by the second. It was a woman, her long dark hair flowing behind her as she glided silently across the floor. Her movements were unnatural, almost as if she wasn't walking but floating just above the ground. Lisa froze, unable to speak, her eyes locked on the figure. Ben and Mark followed her gaze, and the moment they saw it, they too were paralyzed with fear. The woman's face was obscured by her hair, but there was something about her presence that was deeply, profoundly wrong. It wasn't just that she was out of place, it was that she didn't belong in the realm of the living. Mark, the most curious of the three, felt an irrational urge to step closer, to see the figure more clearly. Against the rising sense of dread in his chest, he moved toward the woman, his feet dragging as if something was pulling him forward. He couldn't stop himself. As he drew near, the figure slowly turned, revealing her face. It wasn't human. Her skin was gray and stretched tight across her skull. Her eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to suck in all the light around them. Her mouth twisted into an impossibly wide grin, her teeth sharp and rotten. Mark froze, his heart pounding in his ears. For a brief second, their eyes, those empty, soulless eyes, locked onto his, and he felt something cold and dark reach into his chest. The scream that followed tore through the stillness of the castle, echoing off the walls and sending a wave of pure terror through Lisa and Ben. Mark stumbled back, his mind reeling, and turned to run. His breath coming in ragged gasps, he reached his friends, his face pale and drenched in sweat, barely able to form the words to describe what he had seen. They didn't need an explanation. The terror in his eyes was enough. The three of them grabbed their things and ran, their footsteps pounding against the stone floors as they darted through the castle's darkened hallways. The whispers followed them, growing louder and more insistent, as if the very walls were alive, mocking their fear. Doors slammed shut behind them as they ran, as if something was trying to trap them inside. The air grew colder, biting at their skin. The shadows that had once been mere tricks of the light now seemed to move with purpose, creeping closer and closer. The castle twisted around them, the familiar halls and doorways shifting, making it impossible to find their way out. It was as if the building itself had become a maze, designed to keep them trapped forever. Lisa's breath came in shallow gasps, her heart racing as panic set in. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, hunted. Ben, in the lead, turned a corner and skidded to a stop. Before him, the figure of the woman stood once again, blocking their path, her hollow eyes fixed on him, her twisted grin growing wider as she took a step forward. Ben's body went cold as she reached out a hand, her fingers long and bony like the claws of some ancient, malevolent creature. With a desperate shout, Ben turned and bolted in the opposite direction, the others close behind. But no matter how fast they ran, the figure always seemed to be just behind them, her footsteps silent but ever present. The whispers became a deafening roar in their ears, the words still unintelligible, but filled with anger, malice, and a promise of violence. The castle's doors and windows slammed shut, one by one, sealing them inside with whatever haunted this cursed place. Finally, they reached the main hall where they had set up camp. The fire had long since died, leaving the room in complete darkness. Desperately, they searched for an exit, but there was none. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the oppressive sense of being watched grew stronger. Mark, his body trembling with fear, noticed something strange about the room. The shadows weren't just creeping along the walls anymore. They were converging in the center of the room, swirling together like a storm cloud gathering strength. And from the darkness, the woman emerged again, her eyes burning with a cold, malevolent hunger. Lisa's legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor, unable to move, her body paralyzed with fear. Ben and Mark grabbed her, trying to pull her to her feet, but it was as if her body had turned to stone. The whispers grew louder and louder, the woman drawing closer, her twisted grin spreading across her face. It was then that the castle itself seemed to take a deep, shuddering breath, as if it was alive, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. But just as the darkness seemed to swallow them whole, the first rays of sunlight broke through the cracks in the castle's walls. The figure froze, her expression contorting into one of rage and pain. The whispers stopped abruptly, and for a moment, the air was filled with an oppressive silence. The woman let out a shriek that shook the very foundations of the castle, and in an instant, she was gone, vanished into the shadows. The walls around them seemed to relax, and the castle fell still once more. Lisa, Ben, and Mark stumbled out of the castle as the morning sun cast a warm glow over the countryside. They were alive, but forever changed. They had escaped the castle's clutches, but they could still feel the presence of something dark, something ancient, lingering just beyond their reach. No one believed them when they told their story. The authorities searched the castle but found no evidence of what had happened, no trace of the woman, and no explanation for the strange events. But the three friends knew the truth. Moosham Castle was alive. It wasn't just a place haunted by the past, it was a living, breathing entity. And the evil inside wasn't finished. Even now, years later, the memory of that night still haunts them. The shadows of the castle may have let them go, but they will never be free from the darkness they encountered there. And the whispers, they never really stopped.